The house that devours women. The blood on the floorboards had long since turned black, but Martha could still smell it. Standing in the doorway of what the townspeople whispered was the most cursed house in all of Vermont, she felt her breath catch in her throat as if the very air itself had thickened with decades of suffering. The year was 1847, and Martha Whitmore had traveled 300 miles from Boston with nothing but a worn leather satchel and a heart full of desperate hope to become the eighth bride of Cornelius Hartwell. Behind her, the autumn wind howled through the bare branches of ancient oak trees that seemed to lean away from the house, as if even nature itself recoiled from whatever darkness lived within those walls. The Hartwell estate loomed before her like a monument to madness, 3 stories of weathered wood and cracked windows that stared down at her like dead eyes. She had heard the stories, of course. Every soul from Burlington to Montpelier knew the tale of the 7 wives who had entered this house as blushing brides and left either in pine boxes or straitjackets, their minds shattered beyond repair. But Martha was different, she told herself. She had to be. The consumption that ravaged her younger sister, Elizabeth, lay waiting at home like a patient predator, and the only thing standing between her beloved sister and a pauper's grave was the substantial dowry that Cornelius Hartwell had promised in his letter, a dowry that would pay for the finest doctors in Boston. The heavy wooden door groaned open before she could even knock, and there stood Cornelius Hartwell himself, tall and imposing with silver hair that caught the dying light, and eyes the color of winter ice. He possessed the kind of refined handsomeness that belonged in oil paintings rather than standing in doorways of haunted houses. But there was something else, something that made her skin crawl, the way his gaze seemed to look through her, rather than at her, as if he were seeing someone who wasn't there. "Welcome, Martha," he said, and his voice carried the educated cadence of old New England money. But underneath it ran something that sounded almost like hunger. "You look exactly as I hoped you would." She forced a smile, though. Her hands trembled as she gripped her satchel tighter. "The resemblance is remarkable." He continued, stepping aside to let her enter, and she noticed how he moved with the careful precision of a man much older than his apparent years. "Remarkable," she echoed, though she had no idea what he meant. The interior of the house struck her like a physical blow. Rich mahogany panels lined the walls, and Persian rugs covered floors that seemed to stretch endlessly into shadow. But it was the portraits that made her stomach lurch. 7 oil paintings hung in the grand foyer. 7 women with faces so similar to her own that she might have been looking at mirrors reflecting different versions of herself. Each woman possessed the same auburn hair, the same green eyes, the same delicate bone structure that Martha had inherited from her Irish grandmother. But their eyes, dear God, their eyes. In the first portrait, the woman smiled with genuine joy, her wedding dress pristine white, and her face glowing with happiness. The second woman looked troubled, her smile forced and her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that the knuckles had been painted white. By the third portrait, the joy had completely vanished, replaced by a haunted expression that seemed to follow Martha as she moved. The fourth woman looked terrified. The fifth appeared to be screaming, though her mouth was closed. The sixth stared out with the blank expression of someone who had retreated so far into madness that nothing of the original person remained. And the seventh portrait showed only an empty chair. "My previous wives," Cornelius said, following her gaze with something that might have been pride. "All beautiful, all devoted, all chosen specifically for their remarkable resemblance to someone very dear to my heart." Martha felt bile rise in her throat but forced it down. "Where are they now?" she managed to ask, and he replied simply, as if that explained everything. "But you, my dear Martha, you are here now, and that is what matters." Moved closer, and she caught the scent of something medicinal on his clothing, something that reminded her of the hospitals where her sister had wasted away. "Tell me about Elizabeth," he said, and Martha's blood went cold. She had never mentioned her sister's name in their correspondence. How could he possibly know? "I can see the question in your eyes." He continued, his smile never wavering. "A man in my position learns to be thorough in his research. Your sister is dying. Is she not? Consumption. Very sad. Very expensive to treat properly. The way he spoke about her sister's illness with such casual indifference made something inside Martha twist with rage. But she needed his money. Elizabeth needed his money. Yes, she admitted quietly. She is very ill. Then we understand each other perfectly, he said. Extending his arm, shall I show you to your room? You must be tired from your journey. Tomorrow we shall discuss the wedding arrangements. As they climbed the grand staircase, Martha noticed how the floorboards beneath the carpet creaked in a rhythm that sounded almost like whispered names. Sarah, Catherine Margaret Abigail, Constance, Ruth Evangeline, 7 names for 7 wives. Her room was beautiful, she had to admit. Rich blue wallpaper adorned with silver roses covered the walls, and a 4-poster bed dominated the space draped in silk curtains, the color of morning mist. But the mirror, the ornate silver mirror that hung above the vanity, made her skin crawl. Not because of anything she could identify, but because of the way it seemed to reflect not just her image but something else. Something that moved in the corners of her vision whenever she wasn't looking directly at it. After Cornelius left her alone, Martha sat on the edge of the bed and tried to convince herself that she was imagining things, that the stress of leaving home combined with the gruesome stories she had heard were simply playing tricks on her mind. But as night fell and shadows crept across the room, she began to hear them, the whispers soft, at first like wind through leaves, but gradually growing clearer until she could make out words. Run, get out while you can. He killed us. He killed us all. Martha pressed her hands to her ears, but the voices seemed to come from inside her head. Now, 7 distinct voices, each one desperate and pleading. 7 women who had once stood in this very room as she did now. 7 brides who had believed they could survive whatever darkness lived in Cornelius Hartwell's heart. As midnight approached, Martha realized with growing horror that the whispers weren't coming from ghosts. They were coming from the mirror, and reflected in its silver surface. She could see not just her own terrified face, but 7 other women standing behind her. 7 brides in 7 different wedding dresses, all of them screaming, all of them pointing at something behind her, all of them mouthing the same word. Behind Martha spun around, expecting to find Cornelius standing there, but the room was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, her reflection was alone again. But written in what looked like condensation across the glass was a message that made her blood freeze. You are not his wife. You are his offering. And tomorrow night, when the moon is dark, the ritual will be, complete the cellar of secrets. Martha did not sleep that night, but when dawn broke, she convinced herself the mirror had been nothing more than a nightmare, born from exhaustion and fear. The morning light streaming through her bedroom windows made everything seemed less sinister, and she told herself that grief over Elizabeth had made her see things that weren't there. But as she dressed in the simple blue gown that Cornelius had laid out for her, she noticed something that made her hands shake. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been tailored specifically for her measurements, as if he had known exactly what size she would be long before she had ever agreed to come. Downstairs, she found Cornelius waiting in the dining room with breakfast already. Prepared ham and eggs and fresh bread that should have smelled wonderful, but instead carried an underlying scent that reminded her of something rotting. Good morning, my dear, he said, rising to pull out her chair with the practiced courtesy of a true gentleman. I trust you slept well. The house can be rather vocal at night until one grows accustomed to it. Martha forced herself to meet his gaze. Vocal, she repeated, old houses settle. He explained, though his eyes held that same unsettling intensity she had noticed the day before. The wood contracts and expands, creates all manner of sounds, whispers, some might say. He knew. Somehow he knew exactly what she had heard. Tell me about the portraits, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Your previous wives, they all looked so much like you. Cornelius finished taking a bite of his ham with obvious relish. As I have always been drawn to a particular type of beauty. Your type of beauty, Martha. There is something so pure about auburn hair and green eyes, so reminiscent of someone I once knew. Who, she asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. My sister, he said. And the way he said it made Martha feel as if ice water had been poured down her spine. Eleanor, she was the most beautiful creature who ever drew. Breath hair like autumn leaves and eyes like emeralds. She died when we were children. Scarlet fever, I have spent my entire life trying to find her again. The fork slipped from Martha's grasp and clattered against her plate. You mean women who remind you of her? No, Cornelius said, leaning forward with an intensity that made her want to flee. I mean her, Eleanor. My beloved sister who promised she would never leave me, who swore on her deathbed that she would find a way back. Martha pushed back from the table, but Cornelius continued speaking as if he hadn't noticed. The ritual requires 7 sacrifices, he explained conversationally. 7 women who carry Eleanor's essence. 7 souls to call her back from whatever darkness claimed her. I have been so patient, Martha, so very patient. But tomorrow night when the moon goes dark, the circle will finally be complete. She ran. Martha bolted from the dining room and up the stairs, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. When she reached her room, she found the door locked from the inside, which was impossible, because she had the only key. Through the keyhole she could hear movement, footsteps, and then a voice, soft and young, and speaking with the accent of a child born. To wealth, Martha, sweet Martha, do not be afraid. I have been waiting so long for you to arrive. Martha pressed her eye to the keyhole and saw a figure in white standing by the window. A young girl, perhaps 12 years old, with auburn hair and green eyes, identical to her own Eleanor, she whispered. The girl turned and smiled, and Martha saw that her face was not quite right. The features were too sharp, the smile too wide, the eyes too bright, as if lit from within by something that had nothing to do with life. You understand now, Eleanor said, why he chose you, why he chose all of us. We are not separate women. Martha, we are fragments of the same soul, pieces of me scattered across time and space. And tomorrow night we will be whole again. Martha stumbled backward. From the door, this was madness. Complete and utter madness. But even as she tried to rationalize what she was seeing, she noticed something that made her blood turn cold. Her reflection in the hallway mirror showed not just herself, but the outline of 6 other women standing behind her, 6 previous wives, all of them reaching out as if trying to warn her of something, and behind them all stood Eleanor, still smiling, that terrible too wide smile, still speaking in that sweet childish voice. Run, Martha, run, as far and as fast as you can, but know this, you cannot escape what you are, you cannot change what you were born to be, you are me. Martha, you have always been me, and tomorrow night you will remember. Martha turned and ran down the hallway, but every door she tried was locked. Every window was barred. The house itself seemed to shift around her corridors, stretching longer than they should be. Stairs appearing where none had been before, and everywhere she looked, mirrors. Mirrors showing her not just her own terrified face, but glimpses of lives that felt like memories. A young girl dying of scarlet fever, begging her brother not to let her go. A grieving boy kneeling beside a grave, making promises to the dead. 7 women over the decades, each one drawn to Vermont by circumstances that seemed like coincidence, but now felt like destiny. 7 brides who had discovered too late that they were never meant to be wives. They were meant to be vessels. Finally, Martha found herself in the cellar, a vast stone chamber lit by candles that seemed to burn with flames of different colors, and there carved into the floor was a circle. 7 points marked by symbols that hurt to look at directly. At each point lay the remains of what had once been a wedding dress, blood-stained and rotting. But at the center of the circle stood something that made Martha scream, a mirror tall as a person, and framed in what looked like bone, and reflected in its surface was not the cellar, but a bedroom, a child's bedroom from decades past, where a young girl lay dying and a boy knelt beside her holding her hand, making promises, terrible promises, promises that had cost 7 women their lives, and tomorrow night would cost Martha hers, unless she could find a way to break a curse that had been growing stronger for 25 years. The truth in blood, Martha stood frozen in that candlelit cellar, staring at the bone mirror, when she heard footsteps on the stone stairs behind her. But it was not Cornelius who descended into that chamber of horrors. It was a woman, tall and gaunt with silver hair pulled back severely and eyes that held the haunted look of someone who had seen too much. The woman wore the black dress of a housekeeper but moved with the quiet authority of someone who had once commanded respect. "You should not be here, child," the woman said, her voice carrying the faint trace of an Irish accent. "Though I suppose it matters little now. Tomorrow night we'll see the end of it all. One way or another." "Who are you?" Martha whispered, though something in the woman's face seemed familiar. "Bridget O'Malley." The woman replied, "I was housekeeper to the Hartwell family for 30 years. I delivered Eleanor Hartwell into this world, and I watched her brother lose his mind when she left it." Bridget moved closer to the mirror, and Martha saw that the woman's hands were scarred. Old burns that looked deliberate, purposeful. "I tried to stop him after the first girl," she continued. "Sarah Whitman was her name. Sweet thing from Connecticut. Looked enough like Eleanor to be her twin. When I found her body in this very circle, drained of blood and still warm, I knew what Cornelius had become, what grief and madness had twisted him into. But Martha, you must understand something. The ritual, it worked." Bridget touched the surface of the bone mirror, and immediately the reflection changed. Instead of the dying child's bedroom, Martha now saw a woman, beautiful beyond description, with auburn hair that seemed to move in a wind that touched nothing else. Eleanor stood in the mirror, but she was no longer a child. She had grown, fed on the life force of 7 sacrificed women. She had become something far more terrible than death. Sister Bridget whispered, and the woman in the mirror smiled. Sweet, faithful Bridget, still trying to protect the lambs from the wolf, still believing that love can conquer what has already been conquered by something far darker. Eleanor stepped forward, and her hand pressed against the inside of the mirror where her palm touched the glass. Frost began to spread. "Tell her, Bridget. Tell her what she really needs to know. Tell her why she looks exactly like me. Why they all looked exactly like me." Bridget turned to Martha, and the pain in the older woman's eyes was bottomless. "Because you are." All her descendants, child Eleanor's bloodline scattered across New England when the family fled Vermont after her death. Cornelius has been hunting his own blood, his own family, calling you back one by one. Martha felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "That cannot be true," it is Eleanor said from within the mirror. "Great-great-granddaughters mostly. A few great-great-great, but all carrying my essence. All part of me. And now that 7 of us have been gathered, now that the circle is nearly complete, I can finally take my rightful place in the world of the living." But Martha found her voice, and with it came a fury that surprised even her. "You are dead, dead and gone. These women had lives, had families, had people who loved them. They were not yours to take." Eleanor's laughter was like breaking glass. "Love, child. You speak to me of love. Do you know what love is? Love is a brother who refuses to let his sister go, who spends decades perfecting rituals that lesser minds would call impossible, who sacrifices everything, including his own sanity, to bring back the one person who gave his life meaning." Martha looked around the cellar at the rotting wedding dresses, at the bloodstains that had seeped so deep into the stone they had become part of it, at the symbols carved into the floor that seemed to writhe and move when she wasn't looking directly at them. "This is not love," she said. "This is obsession. This is madness. This is evil. Then you understand nothing about sacrifice." Cornelius said from behind her. Martha spun around to find him standing at the bottom of the stairs, but he was no longer the distinguished gentleman who had greeted her at the door. His hair hung in greasy strands around a face that had grown gaunt and hollow. His clothes were stained with things Martha did not want to identify, and his eyes burned with the fevered light of someone who had stared too long into darkness and found it staring back. "Tomorrow night, my beloved Eleanor will walk among the living again," he continued, "and you, my dear Martha, will have the honor of making that miracle possible. Your blood, your life force, your very soul will complete the transformation." Martha backed away until she felt the cold stone of the cellar wall against her shoulders. "There has to be another way, some other solution." "Everyone I have ever loved is gone," Cornelius said, My parents died when I was 19, consumption. Same disease that took Eleanor, same disease that is slowly killing your precious sister Elizabeth. But you see, Martha, death need not be permanent. Death is simply another boundary to cross, another rule to break. He moved closer, and Martha could smell the madness on him, like spoiled milk and burning hair. Your sister will die within the month, he continued, alone and in agony unless what Martha whispered. Unless you take her place, give your life willingly. Let Eleanor use your body as a vessel, and I will ensure that Elizabeth receives the finest medical care available. She will live, Martha. Your sacrifice will save her, just as Eleanor's sacrifice will save me from an eternity of grief. Martha felt tears streaming down her face, but also felt something else, a terrible temptation, because Elizabeth was dying, and Martha would do anything to save her, even surrender her soul to something that wore her ancestor's face. From within the mirror, Eleanor watched with growing excitement. Yes, sister. Yes, dear Martha. You feel it now. Don't you? The pull of blood calling to blood. The knowledge that some prices are worth paying. Some sacrifices are necessary. But then Bridget spoke, her voice cutting through the madness like a blade through silk. There is another way, child, a way that will save your sister and stop this horror forever. But it will require more courage than any of the others possessed, more strength than I had when I was young enough to use it. Martha looked at the old housekeeper and saw something in her eyes that looked almost like hope. What way, she asked. What other choice do I have? Bridget smiled, and for the first time since entering that chamber of horrors, Martha saw something that looked like light. You can choose to remember who you really are. Not Eleanor. Not a fragment of a dead girl's soul, but Martha Whitmore, a woman with her own strength, her own power, her own magic. And tomorrow night, when the ritual begins, you can turn that power against the ones who would use you, but child, it will cost you everything. The weight of ancient blood. Martha stared at Bridget with desperate hope burning in her chest. But before the old woman could explain further, Cornelius lunged forward with inhuman speed. His fingers closed around Martha's throat, and she felt strength that no mortal man should possess. You will not poison her mind with your lies, old woman, he snarled. Eleanor has waited too long, suffered too much. I will not let you destroy everything we have worked toward. But as his grip tightened, Martha felt something strange, a warmth spreading through her veins, a power she had never known she possessed. And suddenly, she was not just Martha Whitmore, the desperate sister trying to save Elizabeth. She was something, more, something that remembered. The memories hit her like lightning. Not her memories, but those of her bloodline. 7 generations of women who had carried Eleanor Hartwell's essence. And with those memories came knowledge. Ancient knowledge that had been passed down through blood and bone. Knowledge of magic that predated Christianity. Of power that flowed through certain families like an underground river. Martha raised her hand, and Cornelius flew backward as if struck by an invisible force. He slammed into the stone wall with a sickening crack and crumpled to the floor. But Eleanor in the mirror began to laugh. Yes, sister. Yes, my dear descendant. You feel it now, don't you? The magic that runs in our veins. The power that makes us more than mortal. Use it. Let it flow through you. Become what you were always meant to be. But Bridget stepped between Martha and the mirror, her scarred hands glowing with that same strange warmth. No, child, that is exactly what they want. You think this power is yours, but it belongs to her. Every spell you cast, every miracle you perform, feeds her strength, makes her more real, more able to cross from death into life. Martha looked at her hands still tingling with energy. She did not understand. Then what is the other way? What choice do I have if I cannot use this power? Bridget moved to one of the carved symbols on the floor, complex design that hurt to look at directly. But as Martha watched, the old woman began to trace new lines, counter symbols that seemed to make the air itself shiver. The ritual circle is not just about bringing Eleanor back, she explained. It is about binding 7 souls together. 7 fragments of the same essence. But what if instead of serving her purpose, we used that connection for our own? What if we turned the binding into a trap, Martha felt understanding dawn like a cold sunrise. You mean trap? Eleanor used the ritual against her. But how? We would need the others. The 6 who came before. Their souls are still here. Still connected to this place. Still connected. To you through blood. If we could reach them. If we could convince them to help. We could reverse the flow of power. Instead of Eleanor feeding on us. We could drain her. Send her back to whatever darkness spawned her. But Martha, the cost. The 7 souls would still need to be bound, still need to be sacrificed, including yours. From her place on the floor, Eleanor began to scream, a sound like breaking crystal and dying birds. No, you cannot. I will not be denied. Not when I am so close. Not when freedom is finally within my grasp. The mirror began to crack, spider web fractures spreading across its surface, and through each crack seeped something that looked like liquid shadow. Cornelius struggled to his feet, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, but his eyes still burned with that terrible devotion. You do not understand, he gasped. Eleanor is not evil. She is lonely. She is afraid. She has been trapped in darkness for 25 years. All she wants is to live again, to feel sunlight on her face, to breathe air that is not thick with the scent of death. Martha felt a stab of something that might have been sympathy, but then she looked again at the rotting wedding dresses, at the bloodstains that would never wash clean, at the symbols carved by a madman who had convinced himself that murder was love. 7 women had died for Eleanor's loneliness. 7 lives cut short so that one selfish spirit could escape the natural order. How many more would die if Eleanor returned? How many more families would be destroyed by Cornelius' endless obsession? Martha made her choice. Tell me what I need to do, she said to Bridget. Tell me how to reach the others. How to turn this ritual into a trap. Bridget nodded grimly. The connection is already there, child. You felt it when you touched the mirror. When you heard their voices, they are all part of you now, all waiting for someone strong enough to lead them. But you must understand, once we begin this, there is no turning back. The ritual demands 7 souls. If we succeed, Eleanor will be destroyed, but the binding will still hold. The 7 will still be lost, including you. Martha thought of Elizabeth wasting away in Boston, of the promise she had made to save her sister, of the life she had planned to live. But she also thought of Sarah, and Catherine and Margaret and Abigail and Constance and Ruth and Evangeline. 7 women who had never gotten the chance to make that choice. 7 brides who had been murdered for the crime of resembling a dead girl. Their deaths could not be meaningless. Their sacrifice could not be for nothing. Martha stepped into the center of the ritual circle. The stone floor was cold beneath her feet, but the warmth in her veins grew stronger. More certain. I understand, she said. I accept the cost. Then let us begin, Bridget whispered, and may God forgive us all for what we are about to do in the mirror. Eleanor stopped screaming, but her smile was worse than any sound she could have made, because Martha had just agreed to complete the ritual, just promised to give Eleanor exactly what she wanted. 7 souls bound together. 7 lives offered up. 7 deaths to fuel 1 resurrection. Eleanor did not care if the intention was to trap her. Power was power. Death was death. And tomorrow night, when the moon went dark, she would finally be free, whether Martha intended it or not. The gathering of the damned. That night, Martha did not sleep but sat in her locked room waiting for the voices to return. And when they came, they were stronger than before. 7 distinct whispers calling to her through the darkness. Sister's blood of our blood soul of our soul. We have been waiting for you to understand, waiting for you to accept what you are, what we all are. Martha rose from her bed and approached the silver mirror. In its surface, she could see not just her own reflection but all of them. 7 women in 7 different time periods, all chosen, all deceived, all murdered. But now something had changed. Now they looked at her with hope instead of desperation. You know the truth now, Sarah said. Sarah Whitman, who had been the first, who had died screaming in that cellar while Cornelius carved symbols into her flesh. You know what we must do. But Martha, there is something Bridget did not tell you, Catherine added. Catherine Mills, who had fought so hard. They had to chain her to the altar, something about the binding that she fears to speak. What Martha asked, though her heart already knew the answer would be terrible. The 7 souls do not simply die, Eleanor said, stepping forward in the mirror, her childlike face now twisted with malicious joy. They become part of me, forever. Your consciousness, your memories, your sense of self, all of it absorbed into mine. You will not find peace in death. Dear sister, you will find eternal servitude. Martha felt ice form in her stomach, but the other women in the mirror began to speak, their voices overlapping, creating a harmony of desperation. She lies. Eleanor has grown powerful, but not complete. The ritual requires willing sacrifice. True willing sacrifice. If we go to our deaths fighting, if we refuse to surrender our souls even at the moment of binding, we can turn the power back on her. We can make her the sacrifice instead. Ruth Ashford stepped forward. The 6th wife, who had lasted 3 months before madness, claimed her. I learned something in those final days, she said. Something about the symbols. About the magic that binds us. Eleanor is not the source of power. She is a conduit, a channel through which much older magic flows. Magic that belonged to our bloodline, long before she was ever born. Abigail nodded. The ritual circle does not just bind 7 souls to Eleanor. It binds Eleanor to us, if we can maintain our individual will. If we can resist her pull even as we die, we can drag her down with us. Back to whatever darkness she crawled from. Martha understood then. The plan was not just to trap Eleanor. It was to destroy her, to end the cycle forever. But it meant 7 women would have to die with absolute courage, would have to face the dissolution of their souls, while still fighting would have to maintain their sense of self even as everything they were was being torn away. Can we do it? Martha whispered. Can we really resist her at the moment of death? We will not be alone. Evangeline said. The 7th wife, who had lived only 2 weeks before throwing herself from the highest tower rather than face whatever Cornelius had planned. We will be together, 7 minds joined by the same purpose. 7 souls refusing to be consumed. 7 women who choose how their story ends as dawn broke. Martha found herself in the cellar without remembering how she had gotten there. Cornelius was waiting. His appearance had deteriorated further during the night. His clothes hung in tatters. His hair had turned completely white. His eyes had sunk so deep into his skull they looked like holes. But he smiled when he saw her, and that smile held all the madness of 25 years. Today my beloved Eleanor returns to me, he said. Today the loneliness ends forever. Bridget stood beside him. But Martha could see the old woman was not there willingly. Her wrists were bound with rope that looked suspiciously like dried sinew. Her mouth was gagged with cloth stained dark, with something Martha did not want to identify. The ritual circle had been completed, 7 points now marked with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. At each point lay not just the remains of a wedding dress but bones, 7 sets of human remains, 7 women who had died in agony to feed one selfish spirit's hunger for life. Tonight, when the moon disappears completely, the binding will begin. Cornelius continued. Your blood will awaken the circle. Your death will complete the pattern, and Eleanor will walk free. But Martha was no longer listening to him. She was listening to the voices that only she could hear, the voices of 6 women who had died in this very place, who had suffered everything she was about to suffer, who had learned in their final moments what she was learning now, that love perverted becomes obsession, that grief uncontrolled becomes madness, that some prices are too high to pay even for the return of those we love. Most Sarah spoke first. We are ready, sister. Ready to end this. Ready to make our deaths mean something. Catherine nodded. Cornelius thinks he controls the ritual, but the power flows through us, through our bloodline, through magic that is older than his obsession. Margaret smiled. Tonight we do not go to our deaths as victims, we go as warriors, as women who choose their own fate. Abigail raised her hand, and Martha could see it was glowing with the same power she had felt the night before. The binding works both ways. Eleanor needs us, but we do not need her. Constance stepped forward. When the ritual begins, we will be connected. 7 minds, 7 souls, 7 hearts beating as one. Ruth nodded grimly. And when Cornelius raises the blade, when he begins the final incantation, we will turn the power inward. We will make Eleanor the sacrifice instead. Evangeline smiled with fierce joy. She has fed on our deaths for 25 years. Tonight she learns what it means to truly die. Martha felt strength flow through her. Not Eleanor's strength, not borrowed power, but something that belonged to her, to all of them. To every woman who had ever refused to surrender, who had ever chosen to fight even when victory seemed impossible. Tonight, when the moon went dark, 7 women would die, but Eleanor Hartwell would die with them, and the curse that had claimed so many lives would finally end. The only question was whether Martha could find the courage to see it through, whether when the moment came she could choose death over surrender, choose sacrifice over survival, choose to end a nightmare that had lasted far too long. As Cornelius began to prepare the altar, as the sun set, on what would be her final day, Martha looked at her reflection in the bone mirror, and for the first time since arriving at the Hartwell estate, she smiled. The price of freedom. The moon died at exactly midnight. Martha stood bound to the altar in the Adabir center of the ritual circle while Cornelius raised the obsidian blade above her heart. Around them 7 candles burned with flames of different colors. Red for Sarah blue, for Catherine green, for Margaret yellow, for Abigail purple, for Constance white, for Ruth black, for Evangeline. And now gold for Martha, the 8th and final flame, the one that would complete Eleanor Hartwell's resurrection. Beloved Sister Cornelius whispered, tears streaming down his ravaged face. Forgive me for what I must do. Forgive me for the lives I have taken, but you will live again, you will be free. The blade began to descend, but Martha was no longer afraid. In her mind she could feel them, 7 souls connected by blood and purpose. 7 women who had chosen this moment, who had decided together how their story would end. Now Martha said, and the word rang through the cellar like thunder. 7 voices spoke as one. By our blood we bind you. Eleanor Hartwell. Be our deaths. We claim you by our sacrifice. We drag you back to darkness. The obsidian blade pierced Martha's heart, but instead of her life force flowing into Eleanor, instead of feeding the hungry spirit in the mirror, something else happened. The power reversed. The magic that had been building for 25 years. The energy of 7 murdered women, the rage of decades of grief, all of it turned inward. All of it focused on the one who had orchestrated everything. Eleanor began to scream. Not the frustrated cry of a thwarted spirit, but the genuine terror of something that suddenly understood it had been outmaneuvered. No, she shrieked. This is not how it was supposed to happen. I was supposed to live. I was supposed to be free. But Martha could feel Eleanor being pulled into the binding, could sense the ancient spirit's terror as she realized the trapped 7 souls had been promised to the ritual. 7 souls would be consumed, but Martha and the others had chosen which 7. You wanted us to join you, Martha gasped as her life flowed out onto the stone altar. You wanted our essence, our power, our memories, then take them. Take all of it. Take our pain. Take our rage. Take our refusal to be victims. Eleanor tried to resist, tried to break free from the binding. But the magic was older than her obsession, stronger than Cornelius' madness. It had been written into their very blood, into the pattern of their shared ancestry, into the promise that evil would not go unanswered. Martha felt herself dying, but she also felt Eleanor dying with her. The mirror began to crack, spiderweb fractures spreading across its surface, and through each crack poured light. Not the cold illumination of death, but the warm glow of something that might have been peace. One by one, Martha felt the other souls, Sarah, Catherine, Margaret, Abigail, Constance, Ruth, Evangeline, all of them letting go, all of them choosing to fall into darkness. but taking their tormentor with them. Cornelius collapsed beside the altar, the blade falling from nerveless fingers, his eyes wide with the understanding of what had just happened. "Eleanor," he whispered. "My beloved Eleanor, what have you done? What have I done?" But there was no answer. The mirror lay in pieces. The candles had gone out. The ritual circle was nothing more than carved stone. And in the sudden silence, Martha heard something that made her dying heart sing. Footsteps on the cellar stairs, voices calling her name. Not the whispers of the dead, but the shouts of the living. The sheriff from town, a doctor from Burlington, and someone else, someone whose voice she recognized. Elizabeth, sweet dying Elizabeth, who should have been too weak to travel, who should have been confined to her bed in Boston, but who had somehow found the strength to come looking for her sister. Martha smiled as consciousness faded. Elizabeth would live. She was sure of it now. The curse was broken. The nightmare was over, and 7 women who had been victims had chosen in their final moments to become something else. To become the force that ended 25 years of horror, to become the answer to their own prayers. Martha Whitmore died as the sun rose over Vermont, but she did not die alone, and she did not die unavenged. The Hartwell house burned 3 days later. Cornelius was found in the ruins dead, from no wound anyone could identify. As if his heart had simply stopped when he realized what his obsession had cost. The townspeople said it was justice, that some evils carry their own punishment, that some prices are paid not by the innocent, but by those who demand payment. Elizabeth Whitmore lived. The consumption left her as suddenly as it had come. She returned to Boston and married a good man, had children who carried Martha's green eyes and auburn hair, but never spoke of what had happened in Vermont. Never told the story of 7 women who chose to die as heroes rather than live as victims. The Hartwell bloodline ended with Eleanor. The magic died with the mirror, and the curse that had claimed 8 lives finally found peace in the courage of those it had tried to destroy. Some say that on moonless nights, when the wind blows cold across the ruins, you can still hear whispers, but they are not the voices of the tormented. They are the voices of the triumphant 7 women who faced the darkness and chose to light a candle rather than curse the night. The end.